So if you're watching this video right now, then the chances are pretty high that you are dealing with some kind of anxious what if thinking that is, at least in my experience, pretty sucky. Like it's not at all fun to be stuck in this loop of, oh, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? And the anxiety just building up and tearing you apart from the inside out. So in this video, I want to talk about how to stop what if thinking and really the process that you can use to start to escape these anxious thought loops. Now, first thing to realize is, of course, what if thinking is not necessarily a bad thing. After all, a good what if question can really motivate you in certain circumstances. For example, I'm not a very good long distance runner, but if a bear started chasing me and I thought, what if this bear catches me and eats me? That would motivate me pretty well to try and at least outlast the bear in terms of stamina. Could I do it? I don't know. But I would be a lot more motivated than I would if I thought, let me just try to go for a 5k run today. A good what if question can really motivate you. I know that's a weirdly extreme example, but you get the point. So in general, what if thinking is not necessarily a bad thing. Getting stuck in a continuous loop of what if thinking, that is a bad thing. That will kill your progress. I'm not sure why I said that in such a posh way. The what if thinking loops, the anxious thought loops, the analysis paralysis, these things are really bad for any kind of progress that you want to take forward in life. So this video is going to be all about how to stop what if thinking, how to escape that anxious thought loop. Now, the next thing you'll want to understand is that our brains love to predict things. They predict almost everything that happens because that's what our brains are designed to do. Our brains were kind of evolved over a very, very long time to try and predict the most likely outcome for something. Now, the only problem with this is that our brains are pretty bad at predicting things. They generally just go to the worst case scenario and think, well, what if this happens? And then it just tends to stick with that. A lot of the times we like to think of our brain as this kind of Sherlockian device where it's taking in all the variables and trying to calculate an outcome from that, or kind of like Doctor Strange in Infinity War when he's viewing the 14,060 something potential futures, and our brain just isn't really as good at predicting things as we think or as it thinks it is. So why do our brains most of the time just jump to the worst case scenario and run with that? Well, again, it's because our brains were evolved to keep us safe. If we were walking at night a few thousand years ago and heard some rustling in the bushes nearby, we didn't have time to analyze what the potential possibilities of what that noise in the bush was. Our brain just goes, that's a tiger, and we run. Like, that is what our brains are kind of designed to do. It runs shortcuts like that. I believe they're called heuristics all the time, where it just shortcuts everything. It just goes, if A, then B, that's it, no question, go. Start the fear process. But the thing is, we don't live in the kind of world that our brains evolved to fit into. Humanity, in the grand scale of the universe, has advanced massively over the last 2,000 years, so that most of the threats that faced us back then don't even really exist anymore. So typical self-help advice, and granted, sometimes it is good advice, is to evaluate the fear and then face it head on. And that's somewhat oversimplistic. If you look at a book like Susan Jeffers' Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, it's a very simple model. You experience the fear and then you have to do it anyway because you have to take action. Well, duh, yes, of course, but how do you get to that point? And of course, I mean, no disrespect to the author of the book, it's a pretty decent book. I read it many years ago. I'm just kind of using it as a typical self-help example here, so no shade to Susan Jeffers at all. So in my understanding of fear and anxiety and those kinds of what if thought loops that are associated with them, the best way to overcome any kind of fear is to actually take the time to evaluate your thought processes. It's taking the time to really understand what's going on in your mind, what's going on in your emotions. And the best way that I have found to do this is through the process of mindfulness. This is something that I continue to do to this day, and it was something that helped me massively when I suffered with a lot of anxiety problems 5, 6, 7 years ago. So the chances are pretty high that you have heard of the concept of mindfulness. The idea is that you observe what is going on in your mind, in your body, in your emotions without any kind of judgment. You just see what's going on and experience it. A lot of the times when it comes to our thoughts and emotions, it feels like we are in a rushing river, just being dragged downstream, and it feels like we are totally out of control. What we don't notice most of the time is that this rushing river that we think we're in is actually only at knee height, and at any time we can stand up and see what's going on. Again, I'm not making an overly simplistic generalization here for things like mental health issues and disorders. I'm speaking in terms of more general day-to-day thoughts, that we get caught up in our thought stream all the time, thinking that it's a river just taking us wherever it wants to go, and not realizing that for the most part we can stand up and actually see what's happening and not allow ourselves to be swept away by our onslaught of thoughts. So the process of mindfulness is our way of understanding and really feeling our thoughts and emotions and looking at them from the perspective of an observer rather than you identifying with your thoughts. Because a lot of the time we don't actually recognize that the thoughts that we have aren't even necessarily generated by us. A lot of our thoughts are completely automatic. Our brain generates thoughts and images and scenarios all the time that we have very, very little, if not no control of. They just pop up at the weirdest times, at the most random of times, and that's it. We're not even in the slightest bit in control of that sometimes. But a lot of the time we identify with those thoughts. We assume that because those thoughts exist in our mind, that those thoughts are us. And it isn't always the case. And especially this is not the case with what if thinking, because when we identify that those thoughts are us and those situations are going to happen to us, those are our future, then it can massively prevent you from taking the kind of action that you need to in order to get the outcome that you want out of life. So mindfulness is the process of taking a step back from your thoughts and from your emotions and starting to view them from an objective point of view. And a lot of the times what you'll realize, especially with your thoughts, is when you view them objectively without judgment, you start to realize that they are utterly meaningless, that they are very, very fleeting, meaning that they will be here 1 second and they'll be gone the next, and you will maybe never think of that thought again. Like, we go through millions of thoughts every day, probably. I don't have the statistics on that. I kind of made that up, but I would guess that it's a very, very high number of thoughts we go through every single day. Do you remember most of them? No. So the process of mindfulness allows you to stand up in that stream and see that you're not being washed away, that you can choose to observe and choose to participate in your psychological existence in a completely different way to how you were before. Mindfulness breaks that loop of what if thinking. It allows you to step back, see the thoughts for what they are, which is just thoughts, they're not you, and then through that you can feel the fear and do it anyway. That is the missing step when you tell someone that you're scared and they say, oh, you just need to do it. The missing step is taking the time to observe your thoughts and feelings without judgment and with objectivity, or at least as much objectivity as you can manage. And in that way you can disidentify yourself from those thoughts and feelings, and then you will be able to take the action that you need. So that is how you overcome what if thinking, anxious thought loops, things like that, through the process of mindfulness and then taking the action that you need to. It's kind of a two-step process deal. If you just do the mindfulness, yes, you might be a little bit happier, but you're probably not going to take the action. If you just take the action on its own, then yes, maybe something will happen, but you might not actually see the significance of what you've done. So it's a two-part deal. But anyway, that's all I've got to say on the subject of how to deal with what-if thinking. Let me know what your thoughts and questions are in the comment section down below. Of course, if you are new to the channel, make sure that you subscribe to Freedom Through Confidence. But otherwise, thank you very much for making it all the way to the end of this video, and I wish you the best of luck on your journey towards becoming your most confident self.